They taxed human ships, one captain. Forced them to pay, the beacon hit us. Without warning, 1 second I was watching the stars slide past death. Viewport like slow rivers of light, and the next, every screen on the bridge of the Unbroken Claws lit up in deep orange. Orange meant stop, orange meant compliance required, orange in the Varathi corridor meant the KTH compact had decided my day was about to get worse. I am Captain Maravos. I have been running cargo across deep space for 11 years, and I know the difference between a routine scan and something designed to cost me money. This was the second kind. Beacon lock confirmed, said Priya from the navigation seat. Her voice was calm, the way it always got when she was privately furious about something. Priya had been my navigator for 6 years. I trusted her calm the way other captains trusted their weapon systems. Let me guess, I said. Keith Registry. Keith Transit Authority. Yes, they want a full stop and compliance window, 2 minutes to respond before they flag us as non-operative. Non-operative, that was a polite way of saying they would send an enforcement vessel and charge me for the privilege of being boarded. I hit the response key. A Keth face filled the screen. They were tall creatures, broader than humans across the shoulder, with 4 arms folded neatly in what I had learned was the bureaucratic posture of someone who already knows they are about to ruin your afternoon. His name tag read Senior Assessor of Breath. He had the look of a man who had been ruining afternoons for a very long time and had stopped feeling bad about it. Captain of the Unbroken Claws, he said. His voice ran through the translator as flat and even as poured concrete. Your vessel is registered under the Human Coalition Commerce Authority flag, code 77 Delta. You are subject to the transit harmonization fee for passage through the Varathi corridor, effective as of compact standard date 4412.88. I had been through the Varathi corridor 41 times. I had never paid a transit harmonization fee. I'm not familiar with that fee, I said. Send me the authorization document. He sent it without hesitation, which meant it was real, or at least real enough that he was not worried about me reading it. I pulled it up on the side screen while keeping my face neutral. 200,000 standard credits per crossing for vessels registered under Human Coalition flags. What species pays this fee? Asked. The fee applies to vessels operating under ungoverned coalition flags that have not established bilateral trade harmonization agreements with the compact. That is not what I asked. I asked which species pays it. Very small pause, but I caught it. Currently, the fee applies to human registered vessels, only human vessels. I let that sit in the air between us for a moment. Outside the viewport, the corridor stretched on in silence, the kind of beautiful emptiness that used to feel like freedom and right now felt like a trap. How much do I owe you? I said 200,000 standard credits payable immediately for this crossing. Non-payment results in corridor denial and a compliance hold on your vessel registration. A compliance hold meant I could not land at any compact affiliated port. There were 47 compact affiliated ports along my cargo route. Without them, the Unbroken Claws was an expensive piece of metal drifting through space with nowhere to go. I paid it. I pulled the credits from the operational reserve, which meant my crew's bonus fund for the quarter was gone, which meant I was going to have a Very uncomfortable conversation with 7 people who had earned that money. The transfer confirmed. Breath gave me a curt nod and ended the transmission. Without anything resembling an apology, I sat in the captain's chair for a long moment. Dio came up from the engine room. 20 minutes later, he was our chief engineer, a broad man with quiet hands, who had kept the unbroken claws alive through situations that should have ended her 3 times over. He looked at my face, then at the credit ledger on the side screen, and then back at my face. How bad, he said. Operational reserve, all of it. He did not say anything for a moment. Dio was the kind of man who thought before he spoke, which was one of the reasons I had hired him, and one of the reasons I trusted him more than almost anyone alive. Same people who stopped the Harrow Ridge last month. The Keth Transit Authority. Yes, did you know about the Harrow Ridge? Owen Harrow mentioned it at Port Selly, said they hit him for $180,000. I thought it was a one-time thing. It was not a one-time thing. I opened a channel to the Freight Captain Network, a loose collection of independent operators who shared information the way humans always had, out of mutual self-interest, dressed up as community. I sent a simple query: has anyone else been stopped by the Keth Transit Authority in the Varathi corridor and charged a transit fee? The responses came back over the next 3 hours. I read them all, then I read them again. 47 captains had been stopped in the last 7 months, 47 separate incidents, each one a different amount, but always in the same range, always targeting human registered vessels, always citing the same transit harmonization fee. Some of them had complained to their local coalition office. The coalition office had sent polite acknowledgement messages and done nothing. Some had just paid and moved on. The way you move on from bad weather. Accepted, adjust, forget. Nobody had pushed back, not once, not in 7 months. And 47 incidents. I sat with that knowledge for a while. Outside, the stars moved slowly past the viewport. Indifferent and ancient, the same stars that had watched every species in the galaxy decide what kind of people they were going to be when someone treated them badly. I pulled up the Keth Compact Transit Harmonization Charter. It was a public document accessible to any registered commercial operator, downloadable in 17 languages. The file size was substantial. The table of contents alone was 4 pages long. I started reading, not skimming, not searching by keyword, reading the way my father had taught me to read a contract. Every word, every clause, every footnote, every reference to secondary documents, every date and number and definition, because the thing that gets you is never the part that looks important. It is always the part that looks boring. The stars outside were beautiful. I barely noticed them. By the time Priya dimmed the bridge lights for the night cycle, I was 60 pages in. By the time Dio brought me coffee without being asked, I was 120 pages in, and I had found something, not the big thing, yet just the first thread, the kind that feels loose and unimportant until you pull it and find out it runs all the way through. I pulled out a notepad, the old kind, paper and ink, because some habits from childhood never leave you, and I wrote down one word: bilateral. Then I underlined it 3 times. Then I kept reading. The unbroken claws moved through the corridor at steady speed, carrying her cargo of industrial components to Port Sellies, earning the credits that would pay my crew and keep the engines running and put fuel in the tanks for the next run. She was doing her job, I was starting to do mine. Freight Captain Network pinged me one more time before I finally slept. Captain named Owen Harrow, the same one Dio had mentioned, had heard about my query and added a message of his own. Good luck if you're thinking about fighting it. I called the coalition office twice. They said it's a diplomatic matter and they're monitoring the situation, whatever that means. I knew what it meant. It meant they were waiting for someone else to do something. First, I closed the network window and pulled the charter back up. 340,000 words, 11 years of accumulated clause. An amendment and footnote written by Keth legal scholars who had assumed, quite reasonably, that nobody outside the compact would ever bother to read all of it. They had never met a human who had lost 200,000 credits and had 12 days of transit time left. I was going to read every single word, and somewhere in those 340,000 words, I was going to find exactly what I needed. I was almost certain of it. I pressed on. The coffee had gone cold twice by the time Priya leaned over my shoulder on the third day and said, "You found something, didn't you?" It was not a question. Priya had a talent for reading rooms, which was part of what made her an excellent navigator and an occasionally inconvenient crew mate. I had been sitting at the navigation table for 4 hours with a paper notepad covered in circled numbers and a look on my face that apparently communicated more than I intended. "Maybe," I said. "That means yes." She pulled up a chair and sat down without being invited. That was also a Priya habit. "Show me." I turned the notepad toward her. It was a mess of arrows and page numbers and underlined words. The kind of thing that looks like the work of someone who has lost their grip on reality until the moment it suddenly makes perfect sense. The fee was charged under Article 7, Section 3 of the Transit Harmonization Charter. I said, "That is the legal foundation." Breath sight. When he stopped us, Article 7 governs transit levies on non-signatory commercial operators. Section 3 specifically covers what the compact calls harmonization surcharges, which are additional fees designed to account for the administrative cost of processing vessels that do not operate under compact standard commercial agreements. Priya read the passage I was pointing to. Her eyes moved steadily across the page. "That sounds like exactly what he did to us." "It is. But here is the part he was counting on us not to read." I flipped 3 pages ahead. In my notes, Article 7, Section 3, Subsection 9, Harmonization Search. Charges under this section may only be applied where a valid bilateral trade framework is an active force between the compact and the relevant commercial authority. The search charge is an instrument of that framework, not a substitute for it. Priya went quiet. She was doing the math. I could see it in her eyes the moment the numbers lined up. "There is no bilateral trade agreement between the Keth Compact and the Human Coalition," she said slowly. "There has never been one. We are not signatories to the compact. We do not operate under a compact affiliate commercial framework. We have no bilateral trade treaty, no harmonization agreement, nothing. There is no framework." Subsection 9 requires a framework to exist before the surcharge can be applied. I tapped the notepad. "They were charging us that their own law says they cannot charge without a precondition that does not exist." Priya stared at the notepad. For a long moment, then she looked at me. How long did it take you to find that? 3 days. She was quiet again. Outside, the corridor hummed past us in the dark. The unbroken clause was a good ship, steady and honest, and I had always felt a particular kind of peace. On long transits, the rhythm of distance and purpose, right now that peace was replaced by something else, something sharper. There is more, I said. I flipped further in the notepad. The pages were dense. I had written small to fit everything. Article 19, the compact, includes it in all their charter documents because they used it against the Salari hegemony in 2241. The Sulari had been collecting what they called port security assessments from compact vessels in Sulari space without proper authorization. When the compact took them to arbitration and won, they used Article 19 to reclaim the collected fees at a penalty rate. The article was designed to make unauthorized fee collection extremely costly for the party that did it. I let that land. Before continuing, any fee collected under an invalid authorization must be returned at 300% of the amount collected. That means for every credit taken illegally, the collecting party owes 3 credits back. Priya did not speak for a full 10 seconds. I counted me. She finally said very carefully, "How many crossings have human ships made through kept corridors in the last 7 months?" I counted 47 confirmed in the network, but the network only captures captains who are connected and willing to report. The actual number is going to be higher. I turned to a new page in the notepad. I had done this math already. Run it 3 times to make sure. Vathi Corridor is one of 9 primary corridors under KET transit jurisdiction, human shipping traffic. Across all 9 corridors based on the Coalition Commerce Authority's public transit logs averages approximately 20 crossings per day. Priya's mouth opens slightly. 7 months is roughly 210 days. I said 20 crossings per day is 4,200 crossings. The fee varies between 150,000 and 250,000 credits depending on vessel class. If we take the middle figure of 200,000 credits per crossing, 4,200 crossings equals 840 million credits collected. I let her sit with that number at 300% penalty under Article 19. I continued, the KE Compact would owe approximately 2.5 billion credits to human commercial operators. The ship hummed somewhere in the engine room. A compressor cycled on and ran for a moment before going quiet again. The sound was familiar and ordinary. Everything else in the room felt the opposite of that. We need to file a grievance, Priya said. Yes, through the Coalition Diplomatic Office. No, too slow, too political, and honestly too easy for them to let it die in committee. The compact has its own internal arbitration system established. Under Article 41, any registered commercial operator who is a direct financial party to a dispute may file directly without requiring diplomatic representation. I held up the notepad. I am a registered commercial operator. I am a direct financial party. I paid the fee myself. I have the transaction record. Priya leaned back in a chair and crossed her arms. She had the expression she got when she was running through every possible failure point in a plan, the same expression she used when I suggested routing through questionable sector. They are going to Say you do not have standing, you are. One captain, one ship, I expected that. But I am filing on behalf of all affected vessels with supporting documentation from every captain in the network who will give me a signed affidavit. I have already sent the request. 12 captains responded within 2 hours. More are coming. The K legal team will be enormous. They will have people who do nothing but find procedural reasons to dismiss filings. I know. I have read Article 44. She waited. Article 44 is the anti-obstruction clause if a respondent attempts to have a case dismissed on procedural grounds without engaging with the substantive legal question. The filing automatically escalates to the High Compact Review Board rather than being dropped. The KE included it because they once had a dispute with the Drevari Manufacturing Consortium where the Drevari kept filing technicalities to avoid a corruption case. The compact learned from that and built a wall against it. I met her eyes. Every move they try to make procedurally will either fail or push the case higher. There is no procedural route that ends with the case simply disappearing. Priya looked at the notepad again, then she looked at me. Mara, you have been sitting here for 3 days reading a 340,000-word legal document. Yes, on a freight run. The cargo is still secure. Dio did a full check this morning. I am not questioning the cargo. She almost smiled. I'm just noting that most people would not do this. Most people lost their operational reserve and moved on. I said I lost my operational reserve and got irritated. She did laugh at that, a short and genuine one. Then she straightened up and got her navigator's face back, the one that meant she was with me all the way and would not say so in so many words because she did not need to. What do you need from me? Help drafting the filing. Your written Keth standard is better than mine. Want the language tight, no ambiguity, no overstatement, just the facts, the articles, and the math. When do you want to submit? Before we reach Port Celis. I want it in the system before we land, so there is no possibility of anyone suggesting that filing was motivated by conversation I had in port. I picked up my pen. We have 8 days of transit left. That is enough time to do this right. Priya pulled her own notepad from the drawer under the navigation panel and uncapped her pen. She had a methodical way of writing, steady and clear, the kind of handwriting that looked confident on paper. Start from the beginning, she said. Walk me through every article. Order. I will ask questions when something is not clear. We worked through the night cycle and into the next morning. Dio brought food without comment, which was how he showed support for things he did not fully understand, but trusted because I was doing them. Owen Harrow sent 3 more names from the freight network captains who had been stopped and charged and were willing to put their names on a document. By the time the next sleep cycle came around, we had the core filing drafted and 22 signed affidavit. On the 6th day of transit, a message arrived from the Human Coalition's diplomatic office. Someone had noticed the filing request moving through the arbitration system registration process, and they were concerned. The message was polite and worded carefully, the kind of careful that means something was making someone nervous. It said they appreciated my initiative and would like to discuss coordinating our approach. It suggested that a diplomatic channel might be more effective than individual legal action. It offered very gently to Take the matter over. I read the message twice, then I wrote back, I appreciate the offer. The filing is complete. I will keep you informed of developments. The diplomatic office sent a follow-up, expressing continued willingness to assist. I filed that one away without responding and went back to the draft. On day 8, 3 hours before we reached Port Celis, I submitted the filing to the KE Compact Internal Arbitration System. Case number assigned, KCA 4190088HV. The automated confirmation pinged back in flat KE standard, acknowledging receipt and noting that the respondent, the KE Transit Authority operating as an instrument of the compact, would be notified within 10 standard days. I held my comm unit and looked at the confirmation number for a long time. Dia came up to the bridge. He had heard the ping from the engine room, which meant he had been listening for it, which meant he had understood more than he had let on. He stood next to me and looked at the screen. Is it real? He said. It is real. What happens now? Now. They read it, I said, and then they decide how to respond, and however they respond. He nodded slowly. Outside Port Celis was a growing light against the dark, a cluster of docking rings and cargo platforms, and the ordinary business of the universe continuing as it always had. I had cargo to deliver, had a crew to pay, even if the bonus fund was gone for now. I had a ship to keep running, and somewhere in the Keth Compact's legal offices, someone was about to open a filing from a human freight captain and realized that the words they had written into their own charter 30 years ago were about to come back to them at considerable speed. I set us on final approach and put my notepad in my jacket pocket. Port Celis grew in the viewport, steady and bright. The response came on a Thursday, which is to say it came on what my ship's calendar called Thursday, because we had set it to an Earth Standard week when I first took command and never changed it. Some things you keep for comfort. The KAT did not observe Thursdays or any day of the week in particular, and their legal office response to my filing arrived with a timestamp that meant nothing in human terms and everything in terms of how quickly they had mobilized. 4 days they had read the filing, assembled a legal team, and produced a formal response in 4 days. That was fast. Fast meant one of two things. Either the case was so obviously without merit that the response wrote itself, or the case had caused enough internal concern that they wanted it dealt with before it gathered momentum. I was counting on the second one. The response was 43 pages long. I read it twice before I did anything else, because you do not respond to something you have not fully understood, and you do not let the length of a document convince you it is stronger than it is. Length is not the same as substance. I had learned that by page 9. Their argument came down to 3 points. The first was standing. They claimed I did not have the legal standing to file on behalf of other vessels. I was one captain, and my filing referenced 4,000 plus crossings from hundreds of operators, none of whom had individually filed. They argued the compact arbitration system required each affected party to file independently. The second was categorization. They claimed I had misidentified the legal basis of the fee. Their position was that the transit harmonization fee was not a trade levy under Article 7, but rather a security assessment under Article 12, which had different authorization requirements and did not require a bilateral trade framework to be in place. They said the distinction was clear, and my citation of subsection 9 was therefore irrelevant. The third was the original citation itself. They argued that even under Article 7, the term bilateral trade framework was broad enough to encompass informal commercial relationships, and that human vessels operating in K corridor space constituted a de facto commercial relationship sufficient to satisfy the requirement. I sat with those three arguments for a full hour. I made notes. I thought about each one carefully, not looking for reasons they were wrong, but genuinely testing whether they might be right. That is the only honest way to prepare a response. You have to take the other side seriously, or you will miss the real weakness in your own position. By the end of the hour, I was not less confident. I was more on the first point. Standing, I went to Article 41. Subsection 4, the definition of a qualifying filing party in the compact arbitration system was any commercial operator who had suffered direct financial harm as a result of the disputed action. The article did not require each affected party to file separately. It required one qualifying party with direct harm to initiate. Others could join as supporting parties, which is what my affidavit from the freight network constituted. I had not claimed to be filing on behalf of other vessels. I had filed as an individually harmed party with supporting evidence of a pattern of identical harm to others, which was a different thing entirely and entirely permitted. On the second point, categorization, the K had made an error that I suspected they knew they had made the moment a careful reader got to it. Article 12 security assessments required the filing authority to designate the fee as a security assessment in the original authorization document. The Transit Harmonization Fee Authorization, the very document VTH had sent me in the corridor, was categorized under Article 7, not Article 12. The compact's own paperwork had labeled it as a trade levy. They could not now argue it was actually something else without implicitly admitting that their original authorization was incorrectly filed, which created its own legal problem. If the authorization was incorrectly filed, it was invalid on those grounds alone. Before we ever got to the bilateral framework question, the third argument, the de facto relationship claim, was the most creative and also the most fragile. The compact's own legal dictionary, appended to the charter as NXC, defined a bilateral trade framework as a formal instrument ratified by authorized representatives of both parties. The word formal appeared twice in that definition. Informal commercial relationships were explicitly excluded in a clarifying note added in 2287 after a dispute with the Torrent Assembly. The KE legal team was arguing against their own clarifying note. Either they had not read NXC recently, which seemed unlikely, or they were hoping I had not. I had read NXC on day 5 of the transit. I drafted my response over 2 days. Priya helped with the language as she had before, and this time Dio read the draft as well, sitting at the navigation table with a cup of coffee and the slightly concentrated frown he used when he was following something outside his area of expertise, and determined to keep up this part, he said, pointing to my response to the categorization argument. You say that cannot retroactively reclassify the fee as a security assessment because their own authorization document categorized it under Article 7, but what if they say the authorization document was filed wrong by mistake, then they have admitted the authorization was invalid. I said, which means the fee was collected without a valid authorization, which triggers Article 19 regardless of which article the fee should have been filed under. He thought about that, so either way, Article 19 applies. Either way, he nodded slowly and went back to reading. The response was filed on day 11 after I received their counter-argument, 41 pages cited to specific articles, subsections, and annexes with each of their 3 arguments addressed in turn. I also added one paragraph they had not anticipated at the very end, which I will come to. On day 14, the Keth Transit Authority filed a motion to dismiss. I had expected this. A motion to dismiss is a procedural tool, a way of asking the arbitration panel to throw out the case before it reaches a full hearing, typically on the grounds that the filing lacks legal merit or procedural validity. The motion ran to 22 pages and cited 11 different procedural codes. I did not file a response to the motion. I invoked Article 44. Article 44 of the Compact Charter was clear. Any motion to dismiss filed in response to a substantive legal claim where the filing party had provided documented evidence of direct financial harm would be treated as a procedural obstruction and automatically escalate the case to the High Compact Review Board rather than allowing dismissal. The Compact had written this clause themselves in direct response to a case where a powerful respondent had used procedural filings to destroy a legitimate complaint through bureaucratic exhaustion. The notification that the case had been escalated to the High Compact Review Board arrived the following morning. I read it in the engine room where I had been helping Dio with a calibration check on the secondary drive. He looked at my face and put down his calibration tool. Good news, he said. The case is going to the High Review Board. He picked his tool back up, then he put it back down again. Is that the highest one? Yes. How long does that take? The board convenes 4 times per standard year. The next session is in about 4 months. He absorbed that. 4 months. I have cargo to run. I said, we have ports to hit and credits to earn. Ship does not stop moving because legal case is pending. No, he agreed. But you are going to spend those 4 months preparing, are you not? It was not a question. I answered it anyway. I contacted every human captain in the freight network last week. I asked for sworn affidavit from anyone who was stopped and charged a transit harmonization fee. I now have 214 names. I have put out a wider call through the Coalition Commerce Authority's public shipping registry, and I am getting more every week. I handed him the data pad. With the current count, the number is going to be much bigger than 47. Network only captures a small fraction of active operators. Dio looked at the number on the pad. He did not say anything for a moment. I also want to find out about the Salari case, I said. The one where the Compact used Article 19 against them in 2241. The full record should be publicly accessible through the board's historical archive. I want to know exactly how that ruling was worded, what evidence they required, and who argued it. The Compact used their own law as a weapon against someone else. I want to understand exactly how they did it. Dio set the data pad down carefully on the workbench, the way you set something down when you want to convey that you understand its weight. Mara, he said, how much do you think? I had run the numbers 3 times. I ran them again in my head to make sure if the full count of crossings matches the coalition transit logs, somewhere between 2 and 3 billion credits. The engine hummed around us, deep and steady. Dio stood very still for a moment, and then he picked up his calibration tool again and turned back to the secondary drive. I will make sure this engine runs perfectly, he said, for however long this takes. I clapped him once on the shoulder and went back to work. The 4 months passed the way working months do in motion and purpose, in the accumulation of small tasks that add up to something larger. We ran 4 cargo routes, delivered everything on time, and kept the ship in good condition. I spent my off hours building the case. The affidavit count climbed past 300, then past 4. The coalition transit logs access through a public records request that took 6 weeks to process confirmed 217 individual crossings by human registered vessels across Keth-controlled corridors in the period under dispute. The math was no longer an estimate, it was a figure: 843 million credits collected under invalid authorization at the 300% penalty rate mandated by Article 19. The KE Compact owed 2.53 billion credits to human commercial operators. I knew that number the way I knew the weight of my ship, exactly, precisely, without doubt, on a Tuesday, because my calendar still ran on Earth weeks. A notification arrived from the High Compact Review Board. The hearing date had been set. I looked at the date, looked at the route map open on the other screen, and calculated the travel time we would need to divert from the next cargo run to make the scheduling work. I pulled up the freight network and sent a message to Owen Harrow, who had by now become something between an ally and a fellow traveler. All this, a man who had started by mentioning a toll at a port conversation and ended up sending me 40 names and a set of detailed crossing logs that had been invaluable. Hearing is set. I wrote, I will be there, thank you for everything. He wrote back, inside an hour I will be watching, all of us will. I folded the notification away, pulled up the route map, and started recalculating the flight path. The unbroken clause turned smoothly onto her new heading. We were going to the hearing. The High Compact Review Board held its sessions in a facility called the Accord Hall, which was on a station so old that parts of it had been repaired and rebuilt so many times. The original structure was more idea than material. I docked at the outer ring and took the internal transit system to the hearing level, which was a long corridor of polished gray panels lit from above by strips of cold white light. The KE had sent a legal team of 7. I counted them as they filed into the hearing chamber ahead of me. 7 in formal compact attire, carrying data cores and physical document folders. They had the comfortable posture of people who had done this many times in rooms like this and expected to do it many more times in the same rooms in the same way I had. Priya, she was standing outside chamber door when I arrived, dressed in the same quiet and professional manner she used for anything she wanted taken seriously. She had a single data folio under one arm and a look on her face that said she had already scoped the room and found nothing alarming. 3 judges, she said, without preamble, 2 Keth, 1 Salori. The salary judge's name is Counselor. When she argued the winning side in the 2241 arbitration case, I stopped. Walking. The one where the compact used Article 19 against the salary. Hegemony, yes, she was a junior associate on the salary legal team that lost. She later became one of the architects of the reformed salary commercial charter. She has been a board member for 9 years. Priya's expression did not change, but there was something in her eyes that might have been satisfaction. She knows Article 19 better than anyone in this building, including the people who wrote the current version of it. I breathed out slowly. All right, I said, let us go in. The chamber was not large. That surprised me slightly. The hearings I had imagined in the months of preparation were grand, dramatic things, with high ceilings and rows of observers. This room had a long table for the judges, a respondent's table, a petitioner's table, and enough space between them to walk comfortably. Walls were plain. The lighting was adequate. The KE had built the place to conduct business, not to inspire awe. I sat at the petitioner's table and spread out my folio. Priya sat beside me. The lead of the KE legal team was a figure named Senior Advocate Seth, a tall individual with the measured movements of someone accustomed to controlling the pace of everything around him. He arranged his materials with deliberate precision and did not look at me, which I had come to understand was not rudeness but strategy. Ignoring the opposing party was a way of communicating that they were not worth acknowledging. The 3 judges entered and took their seats, and GT, the 2 KE judges, were introduced as arbiters. Das and Keen, the salary judge. Counselor Wen was small in comparison to the KTH, with an angular face and dark eyes that moved across the room with the brisk efficiency of someone who processed information faster than she led on. Arbiter Das opened the session. He summarized the filing, the counter-argument, the motion to dismiss, the Article 44 escalation, and the present hearing. His voice was formal, and even the voice of a process that had been run many times and knew how to run itself. Then he turned to me. Petitioner Voss, you may present the basis of your claim. I had practiced this, not memorized it, because memorized things sound like recitation, and recitation sounds uncertain, but practiced until I knew it well enough to say it clearly and simply without notes. I am the registered captain of the commercial freighter Unbroken Claws Flag 77 Delta, under the Human Coalition Commerce Authority, on Compact Standard Date 44188. I was stopped in the Verithi corridor by Senior Assessor Breath of the Keth Transit Authority and charged a transit harmonization fee of 200,000 standard credits cited under Article 7 of the Transit Harmonization Charter. I placed the transaction record in front of me. Face up. Article 7, Section 3, Subsection 9 states that harmonization search charges under that section may only be applied where a valid bilateral trade framework is in active force between the compact and the relevant commercial authority. No bilateral trade framework exists between the KE Compact and the Human Coalition. None has ever been negotiated. The precondition required by the Compact's own law was absent. The fee was therefore collected without valid authorization. I paused for 2 seconds. I am joined in this filing by 411 registered commercial operators who were Charge the same fee over the same period under the same invalid authorization. The combined total collected is 843 million credits. Article 19 of the Compact Charter mandates return at 300% of the collected amount for fees gathered under invalid authorization. I set the affidavit bundle on the table. It was thick. The weight of it landing on the polished surface made a sound that was quiet but present. The compact owes 2.53 billion credits to human commercial operators. I am asking the board to confirm this, to order restitution, and to suspend all transit fees on human vessels pending the negotiation of a legitimate bilateral framework. Arbiter Das looked at the affidavit bundle, then he looked at the KE legal team. Senior advocate Seth presented their case for 40 minutes. It was polished and detailed, the kind of argument that had clearly been prepared by multiple people over a period of months. He led with the categorization argument, then moved to the standing question, then addressed the bilateral framework definition. His delivery was confident and his citations were precise. He was good. I gave him that. When he finished, Arbiter Keene asked several procedural questions. Seth answered them smoothly. Then Counselor Wen spoke for the first time. She directed her question not to Seth but to a member of his team, a younger advocate sitting to his right who had been quiet through the whole proceeding. The authorization document filed by the Transit Authority for the Transit Harmonization Fee, she said. Under which article was it categorized? The young advocate looked at the document. Article 7, Counselor, not Article 12. No, Counselor, Article 7, thank you. She made a note. The room was very quiet. For a moment, Seth pivoted smoothly. He acknowledged that the authorization had been filed under Article 7, but argued that the substantive function of the fee aligned with Article 12 security assessment category, and that form should not override function. Counselor Wen said, where in the charter does it state that the substantive function of a fee takes precedence over its filed categorization? Seth paused. Charter does not address that specific point directly. It does not. When agreed pleasantly, because the charter assumes that an authorization is filed correctly. If it is not filed correctly, the fee collected under it is invalid, which is rather the point under discussion. She's returned to her notes. Please continue. Seth continued. He was, as I had said, good. He argued the de facto framework point with considerable skill, walking through the volume of human commercial activity in compact corridor space, the regularity of transit, the economic interdependence. He argued that the spirit of the bilateral framework requirement was met, even if the formal instrument was absent. Arbiter Das asked me to respond. I directed the board to Annex C. Page 12. I read the definition aloud. Bilateral trade framework is a formal instrument ratified by authorized representatives of both parties. I then read the clarifying note added in 2287. Informal commercial relationships, including established patterns of trade activity, do not satisfy the formal instrument requirement. I set the document down. The compact's own definition excludes exactly what Senior Advocate Seth is describing. I said the clarifying note exists because this argument was made before in 2287, and the compact rejected it. Then the note was written to prevent this argument from succeeding in the future. I am asking the board to apply it as written. Seth made one final argument. It was the one I had been watching for since the beginning, the argument that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with scale. He acknowledged carefully and without drama that if the board ruled in the petitioner's favor, the financial obligation would be significant. He used the word destabilizing. He spoke about the impact on compact fiscal operations. He suggested with great delicacy that the equitable remedy might be something other than the full Article 19 rate, perhaps a return of the original fees without penalty. As a gesture of good faith, Arbiter Das turned to me. Do you wish to respond to the remedy proposal? Yes, I said briefly. Room waited. With respect to Senior Advocate Seth and the respondent, I said, the compact's fiscal planning is not a legal defense against the compact's own law. Article 19 does not provide for judicial modification of the penalty rate based on the financial circumstances of the collecting party. If the sum creates difficulty, the appropriate response is to not collect fees without valid authorization. That is in fact the purpose of Article 19. I looked at the affidavit bundle on the table. 411 names. The people represented in this filing ran cargo routes and paid fees they could not afford to pay out of operational reserves and crew funds because they had no legal mechanism to refuse. In the moment they did not choose to be part of this dispute. It was imposed on them. The law as written addresses exactly this situation, and I am asking the board to apply it. Arbiter Das asked Seth if there was anything further. There was not. The judges retired to deliberate. I sat in the waiting room outside the chamber with Priya. She had brought food this time, small wrapped portions of something warm that neither of us touched for the first 20 minutes. How do you feel? She asked. Eventually, terrified, I said. She considered that, but I know we are right. Those are different feelings. They do not cancel each other out. She handed me one of the wrapped portions. I accepted it. Dio said the drive calibration is holding well. She said we can run the Ortega route after this without any stops. Good. I ate the food. It was something grain-based and warm, and I could not have described the taste because my mind was somewhere else. Thank you, Priya, for all of this. She shrugged once, which was her way of saying you are welcome without making it sentimental. The math was interesting. She said, I do not get to do that kind of math very often. The waiting room had a viewport. The stars outside were the same stars they always were, steady and indifferent and beautiful, the same stars that had been there before the KE compact existed and would be there long after. I watched them and thought about 11 years on the routes, the ordinary rhythm of cargo and distance, and the small dignities of work done honestly. We waited 3 hours, then the door opened, and we were called back in. The ruling came at 3:40 ship time. Dio woke me because he had been awake since midnight. He had not told me he was going to stay awake waiting for it, and when I looked at his face in the dim light of the cabin corridor, I could see it had cost him something, that watchfulness, that unwillingness to let the moment arrive without someone conscious to meet it. He did not say anything. He held up his comm screen. I read it once, standing in the corridor in the dark. Then I went to the bridge and read it again under proper light, sitting the captain's chair with both feet on the floor and the stars visible through the forward viewport. Then I read it a third time because I am human, and we do not easily trust things that go this right. The High Compact Review Board had ruled unanimously, all three judges, both Keth and the Solari Counselor, had agreed on every point. The transit harmonization fee as applied to human registered vessels under the authorization issued on Compact Standard Date 44,112.88 was void from the beginning. Authorization had been filed under Article 7 of the Transit Harmonization Charter. Article 7, Section 3, Subsection 9 required a valid bilateral trade framework between the Compact and the relevant commercial authority as a precondition for any harmonization. Search Yard. No such framework existed. The precondition was absent. The authorization was therefore invalid at the moment of its creation, and every fee collected under it was collected without legal basis. Article 19 applied in full. 843 million credits collected, 300%. Penalty rate, 2.53 billion credits owed to human commercial operators to be distributed proportionally based on verified crossing records and fee payment documentation within 90 standard days of the ruling. All transit fees on human registered vessels were suspended pending the establishment of a legitimate bilateral commercial framework to be negotiated openly between the Compact and the human coalition under terms that would apply equally to all non-signatory species operating in Compact corridor space, not just humans, all of them. Senior Assessor Breath was removed from his position pending an internal review of authorization process. The ruling did not characterize this as punitive. It was procedural. I noted it and did not celebrate it. It was not the point. I set the comm screen down on the navigation console and looked out at the stars for a while. Dio had followed me to the bridge and was sitting quietly in the co-pilot's chair, which he almost never did. He was an engine room man, more comfortable with the vibration of the drive than the silence of the cockpit, but he was here now, and we sat together in the dark in the starlight, without speaking for several minutes. 2.5 billion credits, he said eventually. 2.53 billion, I said, distributed to 411 operators proportional to their individual payments. He did that quietly. Outside, the stars moved their imperceptible drift. We will get our operational reserve back and the bonuses and probably a bit more. He leaned back in the chair. The unbroken claws hummed around us, steady and honest, the same sound she always made. The sound of a ship doing what she was built for. Owen Harrow sent a message. When I was waiting, Dio said he saw the ruling come through on the public record system, he said, and I am quoting exactly. Well, I'll be. I laughed. It was a real laugh, quiet and full of relief. That sounds like Owen. A lot of people are going to ask you how you did this, Dio said. I thought about that. I thought about 3 days of reading in the navigation room and Priya sitting down without being invited, and the paper notepad filled with circles and arrows. I thought about the 4 months of cargo runs with legal documents open on the side screen. I thought about Owen's 40 names and all the names that followed. 411 people who had paid a fee they could not afford and trusted me to make it mean something. I read the document. I said the whole thing, every word. That is it. That is most of it. The rest is just not stopping when they try to make You feel like stopping is reasonable. He thought about that for a while, then he nodded once, the way he nodded when a calibration check came back clean. Settled, confirmed. Priya arrived on the bridge 20 minutes later. She had clearly been asleep and had clearly woken herself up when Dio's movements through the ship registered on some alert of her navigator's instincts. She looked at the ruling on the comm screen. She read it all the way through without saying anything. Then she sat down and said, "What is our next cargo run?" "Ortega," I said, "departs in 3 days. Is the ship ready?" Dio checked everything. "Yesterday." She nodded and pulled up the navigation system, just like that, back to work. That was Priya. The messages arrived through the morning. The freight network had been watching the public record system overnight, and by the time the corridor outside my cabin was lit for the day cycle, there were over 60 messages from captains I knew and captains I had never met. Some were detailed, thanking me in paragraphs. Some were a single line. One just said, "You actually did it." That one sat with me longer than the others. Owen Harrow sent a proper message this time. 3 paragraphs, not quoting himself. He said he had tried twice to push back on the toll and both times had walked away because the machinery seemed too large and the cost of fighting it too uncertain. He said what I had done was not what he expected was possible, and that he was grateful and that he owed me a drink next time we were in the same port. I wrote back, "Hold me to that." The Human Coalition diplomatic office sent a formal communication noting the successful outcome and expressing the coalition's support for the implementation of the ruling. It was signed by someone with an impressive title. I appreciated the message and acknowledged it briefly. A request came in from a reporter at one of the freight industry publications asking for an interview. I declined, not out of reluctance but out of preference. Story was in the ruling. The ruling was public. Anyone who wanted to understand what had happened could read it. I did spend 1 hour that afternoon writing a full account of the legal arguments. Every article, every subsection, every annex reference, the entire path from that orange beacon in the Varathi corridor to the unanimous ruling from the High Review Board. I sent it to the Freight Network as a document freely available, titled "Only for anyone who needs it." Owen forwarded it to everyone. He knew his network was larger than mine. On the day of departure for the Ortega run, I stood on the bridge while Dio ran final engine checks and Priya applauded the course. The docking bay was busy around us, other ships moving in their orbits of commerce and purpose. The ordinary population of people and vessels doing ordinary things for reasons that mattered to them. I thought about the Vathi corridor, the Oran beacon, the four-armed bureaucrat with his flat voice and his printed fee. I thought about the moment I had paid the 200,000 credits and felt the operational reserve drain to nothing. The specific quality of that feeling, the way it combined anger and helplessness in equal parts and tried to convince you that helplessness was the reasonable response. I had not found that convincing. Not because I was extraordinary, not because I had some particular skill that other people lacked, but because I had been annoyed enough to read a document and stubborn enough to keep reading when it got long, and specific enough to follow the logic wherever it went, and patient enough to wait for the process to work the way the process was supposed to work when Someone insisted on it. That is the thing about legal systems, even alien even ones written by species that did not have humans in mind when they drafted the clauses. The people who build them almost always include somewhere in the structure a mechanism for accountability. They do it because they need it themselves. They do it because they know that power without accountability eventually collapses on itself. They put it in the document, and then often enough they forget it is there, and then someone reads the document. Priya announced that the course was plotted and we were cleared for departure. Dio came up from the engine room and took his station. Engines ran up to power with a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. I settled into the captain's chair and pulled up the flight display. The Ortega route stretched ahead of us in bright lines across the nav screen, clean and clear. No toll beacons flagged, no compliance windows open, just the corridor in the distance and the work. Ready, I said Priya. Ready, said Dio. The unbroken claws undocked, turned her nose toward open space and moved out into the corridor. No beacon activated. We flew free, as we should have been flying all along. I logged the departure, set the watch rotation, and opened the next cargo manifest. There was work to do. There always was. The stars did not stop for rulings or celebrations or the settling of debts. They just continued, steady and enormous and indifferent, the same as they had always been, the same as they would always be. And the small ships of small op moved through them, carrying ordinary things to ordinary destinations, and that ordinary motion was the whole point. We flew and the corridor was open, and that was